So we had H&M. We had the head of DEI at H&M. This was some years ago, right? It was like, let's talk about like that hoodie with the monkeys on it. Like, what was that about? Like, and what did you learn from that? And how can you show up better in the future?
Welcome to the DesignRush Podcast. I'm your host, Bianca Mayer. Today, we're thrilled to have Zach Nunn, CEO of Living Corporate, joining us.
Effective brand storytelling leans into the realities of like whatever is happening with your organization, owns that reality, and then talks about, hey, here's how we're going to continue and double and triple down on that, or hey, here's what we've learned and here's what we're going to do better. That part is where you build the trust.
Zachary's journey from various leadership roles to spearheading Living Corporate's mission-driven incentives showcases his expertise in organizational development and brand storytelling.
So often, though, like what happens is brands will they might try to do some product storytelling, but the stories will be too generic. So then you're putting the pressure on your market to like transpose the story and like and then fit it back to their use case. People ain't even paying attention.
We'll delve into Living Corporate's unique approach to brand storytelling and its profound impact on employee trust and market confidence. Remember to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more insightful discussions with industry leaders. Let's dive in. Zachary, once again, a very warm welcome to the DesignRush Podcast. I am so excited to pick your brain on, brand storytelling and how this not only like influences employee trust and market confidence, but actually how these two things really go hand in hand. Welcome.
Hey, it's a pleasure and honor to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Of course. Yeah, we're very excited. Okay, so jumping right in, Zach, as the CEO of a company that focuses quite heavily on branding, how do you approach brand storytelling to really enhance employee trust within the organization, especially considering that, I think it's something like 65% of consumers actually say that a brand CEO and employees influence their decision to buy into a product or service?
Yeah, what I continue and we at Living Corporate continue to emphasize when we talk to our clients, prospective clients, current clients that we're looking to really continue and expand our campaigns with, is that transparency is the means by which you're going to garner trust from the market. You're going to be able to, if you're able to tell authentic, real stories about what you're doing, the products that you're building, or the experiences you're trying to create, or the service you're trying to deliver. You tell real stories about the ways that your organization is shifting and changing and why employees should want to stay here or why folks should want to work here. That's just going to be much more endearing than like your plastic billboard type commercial, because it's just not real. You think about like where we are in digital media today. You think about the types of content that continues to go viral or create a high degree of stickiness. It isn't your stock, content. And that's not to say that that content doesn't have a place, right? You can still create that content because you want to have some evergreen artifacts that you place in position in different places. But when you talk about creating real engagement that's going to create some type of needle movement, it's really going to be in something that is, again, tangible, down to earth, transparent, and tells a compelling story. I think about the TikTok stream, the who the F did I marry, right? That was not some multi-million-dollar camera setup. That wasn't some huge Hollywood produced script. It wasn't a ton of stuff done in Photoshop and Adobe, blah, 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 blah. It was a lady in front of her phone for hours just recording her actual story, right? The story, and again, I'm not saying that everyone is going to have, maybe your story isn't as ridiculously compelling as that, but the principle still remains the same. That storytelling element is what gets people. The production and the production fidelity of your content it really only needs to really go as far as what one can receive and understand. After that, the rest is gravy. And what people are going to really be leaning on is how authentic is the story that you're telling.
When I tell you that story had me in a chokehold, I was like listening to that woman's like story. It was crazy. It was insane. But that's a whole other can of beans now. But yes, I do agree. I mean, there was something about that authenticity. You kind of feel like you're friends, right? And you're listening to someone that's just talking to you straight up. There's no like agenda there, right? Um, so yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially in the case of brand storytelling. But okay, so say for instance we are talking about being super transparent as a brand. Like let's say your brand, for instance. What are the things that you really focus on to make yourselves be really transparent and authentic with your audience then? Like is there anything, where do you start? What is that you really focus on?
Yeah, so I'll say for Living Corporate, right? Because Living Corporate, we are a brand that amplifies other brands and other people, right? So for us, because we're not doing a lot of like, hey, like our service is in service to others. We're really more like a consulting firm focused on experience management, and brand storytelling happens to be one of our largest product streams or service offerings. For us, though, for me, because Living Corporate really started with me, I'm trying to do a better job, Bianca, of leading into my story. Like when I started Living Corporate, I kind of wanted to build Living Corporate as like this standalone brand that wasn't attached to me, because I have this thing where if you build a brand attached to a person, then your brand can only go as far as that person goes. Or if something happens with that person, let's say they get sick, let's say something happens, they get tired, well, then the brand gets tired. So initially I was thinking about like, let me build a brand, let me build Living Corporate where it's like, it's a fixture and it's not the Zach Nunn show. As I've continued to grow though, I realized that, and I'm the CEO, people care about people. They, like people can only get so attached to a logo. Like, of course, we have some really prominent examples of that, but that's really rare. Typically, people are attaching themselves to a person. It's easier to project yourself on another person. And so for me, what I'm getting better at is being transparent about and continuing to really amplify my own story, right? And how it connects back to Living Corporate. So transparency for me looks like, hey, I'm a second generation reader. My dad taught my grandfather how to read. I'm the first man to start and graduate from Ford University on my mom's side. I'm a family guy. I have two lovely daughters and a wife. I've been here in Houston. Like, I'm talking about like navigating the world of work and my own journey in building Living Corporate. So it's, for me, the transparency, brand transparency comes in the form of executive leadership, CEO transparency, and sharing my story. And then talking about, now let me talk to you about, I was one of the onlys at all of my jobs. I was the only, oftentimes one of the only, if not the only Black man at any of my corporate jobs, right? I was one of the only people there. I'm 6'2", 290 plus. So I have a presence. People feel intimidated. People have said things to me. Hey, this made me feel like this. So here's why it's important for us to create content that, and for us to do the work that engenders employee trust and market trust. And this is why we do this at Living Corporate. So I talk about my own story and how it fueled what we do at Living Corporate and why it's important to me. I think about some of the products that we have. So our e-learning platform, I talk about, hey, here's how we got here. We have an e-learning platform, over 1,000 modules. But let me talk to you about why and how we even built this e-learning platform. We're using artificial intelligence to build a lot of content. But let's talk about what we had to go through and what we had to learn in developing our own AI engine, so to make sure that it was equitable. And we're not, and all this crazy stuff that's happening with ChatGPT, what does it look like for our engine, our proprietary tools, so that we're still being equitable and inclusive? So it's about like connecting for us, because we're selling the idea that working with us will help you build your brand equity and your trust equity, your brand equity in the market and your trust equity with the employees. So we have to lead when it comes to matters of trust equity and brand equity, because you're not going to, if you don't find us trustworthy or you don't find us as a viable partner, then why would you trust us to help you with your brand? Why would you trust us to help you with your employee strategy? So that's our position. That's our strategy here, is very transparent storytelling, starting with something personal and then getting into the so what of our business.
Okay, so in saying all of that, right, we know that like 71% of consumers purchase more frequently from businesses that really reflect their own values. And then that also thereby also, building market confidence. Now, how does Living Corporate utilize that type of storytelling to really align with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, we are really big on when we think about doing like any type of marketing or branding campaign with our clients, we're going to talk to them about like, hey, like what is it that y'all actually want to communicate here? What are you trying to achieve and what are you trying to do? Right. And like, don't give me the boilerplate PR thing. Like, just have a conversation with me. Right. Like, we've had large global pharmaceutical clients who are like, look, in the middle of a pandemic, we want to make sure that Black and brown communities trust us and know that we are someone that they can go to for vaccines. We want them to know that we're invested and committed to creating equitable access to care. We want them to know that even in how we're like developing our medicines, our products, that we are being inclusive in our product testing and our trials. We want Black and brown people to trust us. We want them to trust us as not only someone to provide equitable resources and access to products, we also want them to trust us when it comes to being a choice employer. So when you say it like that, it's like, okay, great. Now we can have an actual conversation and we can craft content and stories around that, right? Sometimes but if it's not something personal, right? And that's what we always try to do in our consulting, in the consulting part of our brand storytelling with our clients. It's, hey, what are you trying to actually do? Like, don't talk to me about your little, like, you can say it's sloppy. Let's just talk about it. Now we can work backwards and say, cool, what's the actual conversations? Who do we need to spotlight in your organization? How do we need to position and pivot these discussions to amplify what it is you're trying to achieve? The core values piece is important, but it's only as important as like how tangible you can make that in the stories we tell. So, and honestly, when you say something like, well, we value integrity, it's like, okay, again, like, what does that mean? Like, and what do you want people to know? What do you want people to do? And then let's make sure that when we sit down with your chief marketing officer, or we sit down with your head of compliance, or we sit down with your CTO or your CEO, that like we're having those really frank conversations. People are not here for like esoteric stuff. Like, they want to like, what is it? Plus, you already know, Bianca, like, attention span is low. People not really even watching all of a YouTube or all of a podcast. You need to get to it.
Yeah, that's why we're jumping right into it in the deep end here. So, okay, you mentioned as well, and we do know that obviously Living Corporate works a lot for, advocating as well for brown employees, right? Now, in storytelling and trying to relate to this community, have you found any serious challenges, and how have you overcome that in the last bits, I'd say?
Yeah, 100%. Living Corporate is definitely, I think it's important I want people to know that Living Corporate is really here on the employee experience side, because we think about experience management as employee experience, as customer experience. On the employee experience side, we really believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. We believe that when you address and solve for the most marginalized of a group, then you're going to improve employee experience for everybody. So to your question about brown folks, Black folks, disabled folks, queer folks, women, first generation, second generation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all non-cishet white men, frankly, the challenges that we typically have is the fact that the content that, like, the conversations we have, sometimes if we're spotlighting like a person from a historically marginalized group, they may not always feel like empowered or safe to have the most frank of conversations. But if the power, I think Bianca is that the frank discussion, that frank storytelling is what catches and grips people. It's that candor that people appreciate. That's why our tagline for our flagship podcast is Real Talk in the Corporate World, because we're trying to have authentic conversation. Just like when you sit down with somebody after work over a beer, or for coffee, and you're talking, you're not putting on the corporate speak anymore. We're letting our guard down. We're having an authentic conversation. So the challenge and how we've had to overcome that is just in our presentation, making sure that we are being as inviting and engaging and really creating the most psychologically safe place for a conversation to happen. In addition though, the challenge that is hard for us to really overcome is, depending on the client or the cultural climate of that org, They might just not feel safe to be as frank as they want to be. But we've had some really great candid conversations through our content that I believe has been able to create a great sense of trust as they're using those that content as assets to engender market engagement.
Okay. And have you had any like inspiring stories that have happened recently where you were able to really break through and have that frank conversation, especially when it comes to storytelling? Do you have a favorite one that's happened recently?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So we had Sandra Sims Williams, who is like the head of people at Nielsen, and she and which was, first of all, I was just so honored that we even could get her, because you think about it, it's kind of meta. Like, we're a brand storytelling, we're doing some brand storytelling work, working with and interviewing and spotlighting the head of one of the largest organizations when it comes to like measurement and data. And it was just like, whoa, my gosh, it was super dope. So she's seen as much work as I've been alive, right? And so she's talking about like the ways that she's seen employees of different backgrounds navigate different situations, and the leadership she had to provide in those moments. How she has had to show up as a Black woman and the challenges that she's had to face, and advice she would give to executive leadership about ushering in and managing this next generation of worker. So it was this really incredible intersection, or rather cocktail, of personal anecdote, wisdom, expertise, and technical knowledge as an HR people executive that was really dynamic. I really enjoyed that discussion a great deal.
Okay, so getting a little bit back to brand authenticity and storytelling. Now, considering the effectiveness of these two things, how do you ensure that a brand's narratives really remain authentic and resonate with both employees and the market at the same time?
Yeah, so it's about doing your research and having a lot of prep and discussion with your client, with those clients ahead of time. You don't want to put out a story or a narrative that is like counter to headlines, or to like just public information, or to like their history of performance. And for me, where I come from is, let's say if I see something in a headline that is bad or negative about a brand, I like to lean into that. Let's have a conversation about this thing that I think about, so we had H&M. We had the head of DEI at H&M. This was some years ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. There's been a few things. Yes, okay, but please continue.
And so
you carry on. Yeah.
so we talked about. Say, listen. I say, listen. I wouldn't be doing you a good. This was like literally during the podcast. I was like, let's talk about like that hoodie with the monkeys on it. Like, what was that about? Like, and what did you learn from that? And how can you show up better in the future? So it's the leaning into it and not acting like so many times. I think people try to treat brand storytelling like it's like this magical salve that you just rub over something and erase. And it's like, no, that's not what effective brand storytelling leans into the realities of like whatever is happening with your organization, owns that reality, and then talks about, hey, here's how we're going to continue and double and triple down on that. Or hey, here's what we've learned and here's how we're going to do better. That part is where you build the trust. It's the ownership of just mistakes and taking lessons learned. It's so strange. Like, and I say this to someone who's been married over a decade. And maybe because I have been married so long, it's like, but I notice just out in the world, like people struggle to like apologize. Hey, I was wrong. Hey, that thing we did, that was dumb. We shouldn't have done that. And here's what we're gonna do moving forward. Here's the policies we're gonna enact. Here's the donations we're making. Here's the nonprofit we're creating. Here's the new talent that we're bringing in. Like whatever the case is, like it's okay, right? Like people have really short memories, and like people are and also most people wake up every day with the really honest awareness that they're fallible. So it's okay to be fallible too. First of all, you are fallible. But to own the fallibility, you actually can create a deeper sense of connection with your employees and a deeper sense of connection with your market. It's just about what you do with that fallibility, because you're a big organization. So it's, yep, we messed up and here's what we're doing to address that. And H&M did a great job in that conversation. It was a really fun interview, and I appreciated them being willing to go there. Typically, if we have people, either whether they're clients or people who we just really like, if you're not really willing to have an honest conversation about like what's happening with your brand, then we're probably not the partner for you, because we're not going to be happy with the results that we get, and we're not really going to stand by them in the same way that we would if we know we're creating authentic, accountable content to help you build that trust.
I really love that, actually. And I think accountability is a hell of a thing these days. And I think people, and you're right, I think people really struggle on how to actually take accountability for the things that they're responsible for, at the end of the day. But I think it is through conversations like this that maybe others can also learn from that and take something away from that at the end of the day. And I also believe that, at the end of the day, you take accountability and the rest of the world can see, okay, this person acknowledges what they did. I feel like now I can trust this person more. And yeah, I screw up too, so it's sort of that, it just drives relatability as well at the end of the day. Okay, now also just on another note, right? So given that storytelling has like a super big impact on enhancing product value exponentially, I think it's something like 2,706%. It's like crazy. It also like shapes consumer preferences through personal narratives and humor. So how do you advise brands then to leverage this type of strategies in their storytelling?
Yeah, so this is where like brand storytelling and product strategy have to come hand in hand, right? So it's about building and knowing your personas. So like for a product, let's say you're building whatever your product is. A good brand, a product strategist, product manager, a product marketer, that product team, they're going to understand, okay, this product is going to be able to engage X amount of demos, right? This generational cohort, this ethnic group, this geo, this whatever. And it's about really understanding and honoring those personas, then going in and finding people that reflect those personas, and then pulling out stories from those different groups, right? So like, this is not an ad, but let's talk about Squarespace, right? So Squarespace, website, right? So it's a website design company. You go into Squarespace, you build. Okay, website design is great for a bunch of people. You got young people of color who use Squarespace. You got old first-time entrepreneurs. You have all types of people. So then when you then go in and you look for those, you honor those demos, you then want to tell stories from a person who represents that demo about how they're then using that product, right? That then, when it comes to like your brand storytelling strategy and how you then take that content and you push out those assets to your different groups, whatever the case is, you put on your HubSpot, whatever your CRM is, you put it out there, then you have something that's like tangible to those different people. So often though, like what happens is brands will they might try to do some product storytelling, but the stories will be too generic. So then you're putting the pressure on your market to like transpose the story and like and then fit it back to their use case. But a lot of time, again, what did we just say earlier? People ain't even paying attention. So don't like make it easy for your market, make it easy for your demos so that you actually can get some conversions by making sure that you're telling stories that they don't have to do too much transposing to fit for their potential use cases.
We know that brand storytelling also, has to address and incorporate diverse voices, and this counts for its employees, it's everything, right? Now, say a company is looking to incorporate this, where should they start and what steps do they need to take in that sense?
Ideally, you want to start with your data. So you should have some internal data team that's helping you understand like just what your challenges are. Typically, at the top of every year, organizations have their OKRs, which are connected to KPIs, key performance indicators, and that should then inform, okay, like where are our priorities? Hey, we know we have a moonshot with this product that we really want to get out to the market. We want to get this thing going and going. Hey, we know we want to hire X amount of people because we gotta draw this in. Hey, we know that we have a talent retention problem based against our own HR analysis. So we know we need to do some employee engagement programming. Hey, we know that like this market is going to have, we're going to have a bunch of new competitors here. So we need to like just reinforce our brand. So like, and it needs to start with the data. It has to start with the data. So that way, when you go to like a potential partner, you can say, hey, look, here's what we know our priorities are, and here's what we want to do. Sometimes what'll happen is brands will just be like, lick the finger. You know what? We want to do this. And it's like, and it might sound okay, but it's generic. And because it wasn't really founded or driven by like tangible quantitative data, it's then harder for them on the back end to measure the actual business impact. Now, look, Living Corporate, we're happy to be that data partner. We recommend you like to get some organizational analytics, not just for your people data, but for your customer data, market data. And we have those capabilities because brand storytelling and data go hand in hand. We decided that we wanted to add that as a function of our organization. So like that is the first thing. You have to be data driven and like what is you're trying to even achieve with these stories. Otherwise, you in the campaign, you have a bunch of really dope stories, but like, did they hit the mark? You don't know because you didn't measure anything. And you didn't start off with measurement. So then you try to back in with measurement, Bianca, and guess what? Now it's confirmation bias because you're just trying to make sure you got some numbers to say you did something. Okay. Now, to your question about diverse voices, I mean, like throughout this whole process, like you should be definitely talking to like different members of your teams. Of course, there's all types of strategies. People use employee resource groups or business resource groups, and depending on what your goals are, and whatever personas you're trying to engage, be them internal or external, you would then mobilize different ERGs or BRGs. That's a strategy. I think the other part is just making sure that your leadership team is diverse, right? So like, let's say you don't have a big employee resource group strategy or business resource group strategy. Hopefully you have Black and brown folks and women and disabled folks and queer folks and trans people and like people around in your organization that like are in positions of authority and leadership, so that when these campaigns are going on or when you're designing these campaigns and they're part of that core team, that like there's representation in some of those decisions.
When you talk about the data and the KPIs and stuff that you need to go to, I'm wondering though, are there any specific metrics that you're looking at to be able to diversify and really hone down what your brand storytelling needs to be?
Yes, 100%. So like you got to look at your market, you got to look at your sales data, you got to look at like how are you performing and where, and how is it doing in your major markets, whatever those markets may be. It changes organization to organization because every company is different. But I'm gonna speak like just more higher level. Like, so from a CX perspective, you want to understand like, okay, how are you performing in the markets that you're trying to target? Do you have any emerging markets you're trying to engage? Hey, when it comes to the actual customers that you are engaging, what does CX look like? What does their customer experience look like in terms of like how often are you retaining and expanding with your customers? I don't know if it's a B2B or B2C context, but it doesn't really matter. Like, it's just how are you performing against these customers? That's going to help inform like, okay, here's our product and marketing strategies to look like on the people side, because organizations have worked and do work with us for internal employee programming too. So that's its own branding as well, right? And so it's on the employee side. It's like, what's the retention rate? What's the representation of different employee groups? What's your sentiment data look like? Are there issues when it comes to like pay discrepancy, and like, is there issues when it comes to like upward mobility for different groups of people? Okay, so those data points are the things that we'd be looking at to say, okay, based against this and looking at like your product suite, here's some products that we believe you should be amplifying in the stories that you're telling. Hey, based on your employee side, here's some groups that we believe you need to create some actual programming and additional stories for. Storytelling is kind of the start of that. And so here's how it goes. But it's really about, for us, it's really about like what the data shows us. And each organization is different. But it's challenging for an organization sometimes, because oftentimes that data, that all that stuff I described, your market data, your representation, and then you go on your employee side, your sentiment and your benefits usage and your salary and your all blah, blah, blah. A lot of times people will say, well, we have all that data. We have it, Bianca, but it exists in like 50 different places, right? So like, what do we do when what do we do with all these disparate data sets? And so for us, we'd recommend you need a partner that can bring all these things together, that can interlace customer experience data with employee experience data. Because wouldn't it be dope if you had an intersectional dashboard and visualization and analysis to say, hey, your product in this market is doing poorly or doing relatively worse than this other product, and also the people that are trying to sell this product in your organization have this representation which is disparate to the population you're trying to sell to. Like that level of intersectional analysis to then say, okay, great, now that we know that, here's some brand storytelling campaigns that we can roll out on the customer side for market, and then here's some programming that we can provide and roll out on the employee side to make sure that we actually have the right representation to create a better customer experience. Like that's the kind of like analysis that is in dire need, it's in dire lack. And I'm excited about the prospect of Living Corporate being that like cross-functional data partner, so that like we can just start there, right? And everything I just said, like it might sound really Star Trek-ish, but it's not. It's like super bare bones, right? It's just what you need to do, and you're gonna walk away with like something much more tangible and practical on your campaigning and your storytelling, because we're gonna say, hey, look, we can look at historical data, and we know that this particular product has never sold at the same relative pace in this space as this one has in this space. We need to figure out something different here.
Having a data structure like that is invaluable for any company, to be honest with you. I think that's one of the foundations at the end of the day right now. It does bring me to the question though. I'm wondering, how are you folks over at Living Corporate planning to innovate storytelling strategies in 2024? You know, just to really stay ahead of building employee trust and market confidence equally.
So how we're innovating with brand storytelling, we're really excited about the prospect of like bringing in and leveraging our website to just tell a more connected story. So, okay, we're going to have like, if you go to like Living Corporate's website, like we have this really dope splash page, right? So it's like where you come in, Bianca, and it's like a video of like whatever, like, and this, we work with the brands on this. So it's like, it's going to be like Living Corporate and then insert brand. And if you go to our website now, you'll see it already. There's like a video. And then when you zoom out, there's like a panel of like different discussions happening, right? Different stories happening. And then when you click each of those panels, it takes you into a deep dive on that story. And not only on that story, but on that brand itself. So we like this idea of like just everything being connected. So like if you start at the podcast, or if you start the newsletter, or if you start on socials, there's a journey that we're going to take you on through long, medium, short, and snippet type content, quotes. There's different ways that we're going to really like have a connected conversation around whatever that, going back to the top of our conversation of like, what is it you want people to know and do? Like there's going to be this, like, there's a narrative tissue throughout the content that we're creating. So the innovation for us is really going to, it's tough. Maybe it sounds cheesy, but like for us, the innovation is going to be that we're going to continue to be radically transparent and candid in the ways that we tell our stories. And we're going to continue to be creative in how we position those stories across all of our different assets, our different platforms. So that there's some type of connective tissue there.
I don't think that's cheesy at all. I think that's a pretty damn good strategy, to be honest. And I wanted to say, I did actually see that on your website when I was busy researching for this podcast, and I thought it was very cool, very sleek indeed. So yeah, okay. I do wonder though, how does community feedback especially shape brand storytelling or the approach to storytelling and reinforce that trust and confidence within a brand, really?
Yeah, I mean, so, with any type of brand storytelling campaign, you have to make sure that there's built-in levers where you're listening for and seeking out community feedback. The worst thing you can do is try to create something that you think honors, again, doing like a little bit of a callback, the personas that your product marketing team have put together, and then only to find out that those very personas are like, hey, this is completely off the mark. I'll never forget, there was this Ancestry.com, I think it was Ancestry.com. It was one of these DNA, look at you laughing already, DNA things. And it was like, it was like a slave like running away with like this white dude, and like, and people was like, and then like at the end it was like ancestry.com. It was like, hey, that looks nuts. Like, you've offended, I don't know, like who your personas were, who your demos were for this. Are you trying to engage black people? Are you trying to engage a lot of white people? Either way, you've made them both feel at very most graciously, charitably, I'll say, wildly uncomfortable. That don't make sense, right? And so like I remember it was up for like, I ran for like a month or so, and I remember like it got lambasted on socials. It got lambasted on what's the word, articles. Yeah, it was crazy. Like, I don't know, like maybe I don't know if we put it in your show notes, but I'm just saying, like, if you look up, like, it was so crazy. And it was like, because it was like fine, it was like something about it, they tried to make it like it was this true love thing, and it's like, okay, but the nature of slavery, like, that's not like the way that worked at all. It's just the idea of like, you want to make sure that there's levers in place that are not only like accessible, and that you're and that you have the resilience and adaptability to quickly pivot depending on that feedback, right? Like, remember, if the premise is you want to endear trust with this community to sell things to them or to get something from them, you want them to buy from you, or you want them to work for you, or you want them to collaborate with you, you want them to engage with you in some way, the minute they say this isn't working, that's the minute you need to pivot. Like, don't wait, don't fight it, don't be arrogant and stuff about it. Like, go ahead and pivot so that you can actually engage this market. Now, if you don't care about engaging this market, and this is all just for optics and stuff like that, well, then, I mean, I guess do what you're going to do. But I'm going to operate from the premise that you're operating in good faith. So make sure that you're listening, and again, that you provide avenues for people to give you feedback.
Do you, just on the other side of the coin though, do you have an interesting story or the best example of when a brand screwed up and then really pivoted very quickly? Like, is there a best case or an example that you know of?
Yeah, I think it was like Domino's. Like, they were like, "Hey, we know our pizza sucks. Like, we're gonna like make better pizza now." And I just found that so funny.
Brings us back to bringing the humor into storytelling, right?
Right. Hey, it sucks. Like, we know, like, it does not taste good. So, like, we're gonna make our pizza better now. You spoke a lot, and we finally have listened, right? I really, really, I enjoy, like, I enjoy that. Like, this idea of, like, not taking yourselves too seriously. Like, most of us are not doing, I mean, most of these brands are not like stopping and starting the world. Like, you sell chips, or you sell beer, or you know,
pizza,
hey,
yeah.
like pizza, right? Like, we're just like, it's okay. Like, you can take yourself a little less serious. And then, you know, but I do think though, like, when it comes to like the more prestigious and intimate the brands, I think that's where it gets harder to do, right? So it's tough for me to think about, like, is there like a big brand that's like, hey, we know that like we've created significant harm, and here's how we're going to like rectify that. Like, I don't know, right? Now, what I will say is, I thought it was kind of dope. Like, now I don't agree with it, but like when Dove soap, they partnered, or I guess it was, and then Unilever more broadly partnered with like oil and gas. Like, so during like when like those oil spills, you would see like oil energy companies partner with like the soap companies, and like, so that was very interesting. Like, this idea of like, we're going to, you know, kind of like lean against your brand equity as this clean company. So we're going to metaphorically clean ourselves as we show your soap cleaning up all these oily ducks, or and seals. So that's interesting. But in terms of like just full frontal, fully throated, hey, we were bad and now we're trying to do better, I would say the Domino's is a really good example.
Yeah, that's a pretty funny one. I didn't know that one actually, to be honest. But then again, I'm not in the US. But I also agree. I think it's very funny when we do not take ourselves too seriously. I really love it when brands bring humor into their branding, right? Okay, so I just want to pivot back to something that we talked about earlier, and that's really highlighting employees' voices within your branding to really, you know, drive that authenticity and trust feeling, right? Now, I'm interested to know where the balance between, authentic storytelling is here with the need for data privacy and security, especially when personal employee stories are being shared. Like, where's that balance?
I mean, what you're describing to me sounds really similar to just like what are effective boundary settings? Like, what is effectively bound? What does it look like to be appropriately boundaried in storytelling? And yes, 100%. Like for Living Corporate, we believe that leveraging your employees, your leaders, but also sometimes your individual contributors and new joiners and things of that nature. Those are sometimes, oftentimes, are your best spokespeople. That's if you have a culture that enables them to be a good spokesperson, right? Which is probably a separate conversation for another day. But the point is around being boundaried. I think it's about just being thoughtful about, how detailed you want to be, right? Like if I'm telling you a story about, hey, here's why this particular place of employment is a great place for me to work, and I'm a trans woman. Well, like I might, and I want to make sure that like our queer, trans, or non-binary audiences hear this because we want to really expand our pipeline for that demographic. Well, in that conversation, do I have to talk about how like my last employer was really bad? Do I have to name drop that employer? Right? Do I have to do that? Like, hey, like if I, I'm a black man, like I might have been like verbally harassed or disrespected by somebody in terms of in my journey in my career. Do I have to disclose those people's names and positions and titles? I don't think so. I don't have to do that. Right. And so there's this level of just like, okay, what does transparency look like in a corporate context that's beneficial for what I'm trying to serve and that honors my actual story? Because we don't want to whitewash or sanitize my story to the point where we're not actually being honest. Right. So for us, what we've learned is just around like, hey, you don't have to give every gory detail. You can talk about the experience. You don't necessarily have to name the person in that or name the company in that. Maybe sometimes you do, but you don't really have to. Like most times, like we can just talk about the story and the experience. And really, we really want the story to be about where you've come from and what you're doing now. So those things should really almost be like seasonings to help enhance the meal, which is where you're currently working and the brand you're currently working at, and not like this salacious gossipy thing of like, let me tell you about this time this person did this thing to me. Because then it becomes like, okay, well, what are we talking about here and how is this positive? Because I don't know. I'm lost.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, there's quite a fine line between rage baiting people, right, and actually just being upfront and transparent about something. Because I feel like, yeah, I mean, again, I don't think a lot of people would feel comfortable talking about those experiences in detail necessarily, because I also think that that's traumatic and it probably is still a really painful part, right? So yeah, I think finding that balance is definitely important for us to keep an eye on. But on the topic of this conversation, right, we know that a lot of consumers, if not most consumers these days, especially I think Gen Zs and millennials, which I'm sure you would know better than me, way more prefer to support brands and companies that really address social issues head on. And many actually, they want companies to advocate and boycott, or they would advocate and boycott based on a brand stance. Now, how can businesses really adjust their storytelling to meet these expectations around inclusivity and sustainability and just social contribution in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We talk about this all the time on Living Corporate, and we're having conversations like on the record, on our podcast, and like across our different like media channels, as well as behind the scenes with prospective and current clients around like, hey, like here's what these demos are saying. What are you willing to do? It ultimately just comes down to the commitment to leadership. I think like executive leaders though are so often like just really grossly out of touch, like with like the way the world works and also like what their customers are like and market are like really interested in. I think there's still like, I mean, honestly, like millennials are still being like dismissed as like these like unruly teenagers, despite the fact that millennials are like 40 now and with like kids. Like I'm a millennial. I'm 34. I have two toddlers, right? I've been, like I said earlier, I've been married for over a decade. So it's like, hey, like we're adults. And then Gen Zers, like Hey, Gen Zers of voting age, like they're graduating from college, they have a lot of voice. They understand technology, social media technology in ways that you do not. They understand brand storytelling, or rather compelling and engaging and sticky storytelling in a way that your highest paid marketers do not. And so you should listen to them. They know how to build community. They know how to build virtual communities in a way that is not anything to shake a stick at and nothing to dismiss. And so it comes though to your point though, like about like what do brands do? I mean, where are leaders willing to go, and are they willing to lead and listen? Like that's what it comes down to. Oftentimes, a lot of these organizations, they have a chief diversity officer, they have a CHRO, they have a head of marketing and PR who are really plugged into these things. But the reality is, a lot of these positions are not empowered with the ability to lead and speak candidly and frankly and really drive it, right? If they were, we would see brands do some things much differently in terms of how they talk about issues, or and them addressing issues. And so the next like 10 years, it's going to be really interesting and curious as to how executive leadership teams decide to pivot. My estimation is that the organizations that choose to really listen and pivot their brands to make sure that they're being mindful of what the largest buying community has to say, which is going to be millennials and Gen Zers, they're going to be the ones that continue to perform well and differentiate in the market. That's my prediction.
I have to say, as a millennial myself as well, I'm very excited for the day that we run how all of this is going to go, to be honest with you. I think we're already getting there, but I'm getting more and more excited about it. Um, okay, so just also on that note, so how can businesses, storytelling really cater to the needs for brands to, demonstrate social responsibility then?
So this is where like collaboration and communication is important. So like a lot of these brands, like they'll have like they might have a social responsibility team. Like it'll be like a single person or a really small group of people at the organization. But the reality is that these organizations need to tap in and plug in with like local and semi-local grassroots organizations around different social impact issues, right? Like you might have to like partner up with an org who is an expert in this topic, and then you are co-branded in your brand storytelling with them, right? You have to think about what activation looks like on a particular topic with like an org that really is doing that work. And that's really it. I think like the worst thing you can do is like rush on Wikipedia, do some very surface level research, and then go, okay, here's our stance on this. It's like, don't do that. Mitigate the risk. Mitigate your risk by partnering with a trusted brand who knows the space, who knows the thing, and then connect that organization with whatever assets, team, whatever you have internally. And then there's going to be something that's really powerful that comes out of that. And that's what I would really recommend. It's the collaboration, it's the mobilization and partnering with like an outside org to then push out to your market that is going to create a better outcome. And I believe it's something actually, believe it or not, cheaper, right? It's more cost effective to do it that way than it is to try to do it on your own, because you're going to mess up and then you're going to there's going to be brand blowback. So yeah, you might end up spending more money by giving a little bit more money to a grassroots org or whatever the case is. But on the back end, which I know we don't really exist, we don't live like that, Bianca. Like we're in this very like reactionary, like we want everything turnkey. We want to make sure we want to collect as much capital as possible right now. But like, hey, I promise you, put this money in here, in like 3-4 years, you're going to continue to see returns against that.
I do blame the sense of instant gratification culture that we have these days. And I'll be honest with you, I'm guilty of it as well myself. But yes, I agree. We have to step back and be like, okay, we need to do everything properly and really put in the work so that we can save ourselves in the long run. And I do agree with that. And I think that's a very good note to take away from this. So just this is pivoting a little bit again, but I just want to find out as well, in your opinion, what role does interactivity play in a business's storytelling? I mean, how does it really enhance trust and engagements among audiences?
Yeah, I mean, interactivity, like the idea of like, hey, your content not being something that's kind of like in a museum behind glass that you look at, but something that you actually experience. It's important. It's important. And having a mix of content and vehicles or mediums for your storytelling is also important, right? The idea of like, hey, we're gonna do something in person. We're gonna do a live activation in person. We're gonna do like a streaming event. We're going to do something where we do like surveys, and then we come back to you, like something that really involves people in the process. I mean, even if you think about Women's History Month that's coming up, Women's History Month, like you think about like, what does it look like to create content around like for a brand? Saying like, and again, this is more like for like an internal employee experience program. So you might say, hey, look, like, what does it look like to support women at work? And you're spotlighting different women leaders, and you talk about the stories and experiences at insert company here. Here's what I've had to deal with. Here's what's been meaningful to me. Here's what that looks like. And then giving your employees an opportunity, like through an open survey, talk to me about experiences you've had and what it means, like what it looks like for you to get sponsorship and mentorship that you need so that you can continue to grow with this organization. You might do some type of live activation where it's like, hey, we're going to sit down and do an actual panel. We do a Q&A with like our top 5 executive leaders at this organization, and we're going to just have an honest conversation about whatever the case is. Like the ability, and then we're also going to do some surveys in between that. So we're measuring and understanding like what's being received and what isn't. What else would you like to get out of this? What else would you like to get out of Women's History Month, out of this program? Like it's the ability where people can feel as if they're actually being spoken to and not talked at. Like that's the differentiator. And I believe that's what's going to make content continue to make content sticky, as opposed to, again, like this plastic, just, hey, we put this up, look at that, and then go on about your day. Like, I have 1,000 things to do. Why would I do that? Right? You got to give me a reason to even participate in whatever you're creating.
How does brand storytelling build employee trust and confidence? And how do these two things go hand in hand?
Yeah. So brand storytelling builds employee trust and confidence because it's practical content for everyone to gravitate to, right? Everyone loves stories, right? Like there has been like research on, there's been neurological research on just like the effect of stories on people's brains. People remember stories. People can project themselves into stories. People love stories, right? We think of like, I just was talking to my daughter the other day about, she was joking and like telling little fibs about whatever. And I told her about the story of the little boy who cried wolf, right? I still think about the little boy who cried wolf. And that story was told to me over 30 years ago. So this idea of like stories, it's just pivotal to how we experience life. Storytelling is critical to just the human experience. We learn, we engage, we retain through stories. To your other question about the interconnectivity of the connection between employee experience and customer experience, the short, very simple is, you're not going to deliver a strong customer experience if your employees are not having a positive experience, right? And let's just say whatever experience you're delivering to your customers, it would be that much better, exponentially better, if your customers were having a better experience. You go to the drive-thru to pick up a burger. If your employee hates their job, that food has a higher chance of not being good, or just being impacted by it. Fries gonna be cold, right? Of course, I'm American. I talk about you from across the pond. So of course I'm talking about fast food. But it's a very tangible example, Bianca. If you're not paying attention because you're thinking you can't wait to get up out of here. So now my food burnt. Oh man, like you weren't paying attention. So now you didn't place an order, and now you're out of your customer's favorite item on the menu. So it should be common sense that if employees are not, they don't feel engaged or trusted or respected, they don't believe they're having a fair experience, then why should they then care about the customers they should be serving? If they don't feel like they're getting paid well, why do you think they're going to break their back to make the company a bunch more money? They don't feel like they're making any money. So employee experience has to be paramount, even from the pessimistic and ultra capitalistic point of view that you got to make money. You're not going to make as much money You're just not. So customer experience, though, right? Like a positive customer experience also feeds back to a strong employee experience. If customers are enjoying what they're getting from the employees from the company, guess what? They're going to then talk well about that company. They're going to then advocate for that brand. That you have a megaphone out there. They might come back and give good feedback to those employees, right? It's a cycle, but it has to start with the employees, which means it has to start with leadership. Leadership is critical in creating a positive, fair, let's say it again, fair employee experience to then drive great customer experience.
100%. I couldn't have said that better myself. Zach, that brings us to the end of our episode today. Really, thank you so much for your insights today. This was really, really interesting. A great conversation.
Hey, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. I come back anytime. Just let me know. I'll shout out to the DesignRush team. Yeah, thank you.
And that's a wrap on our conversation with Zach Nunn. For those looking for a top-tier agency's expertise, be sure to check out designrush.com/marketplace. Our marketplace hosts a wide array of agencies that will help bring your vision to life. From branding to web design, we've got you covered. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more insightful discussions with industry leaders. Once again, I'm your host, Bianca Mayer. Stay curious and join us for the next episode.